Our guest today is the Cook County State's Attorney. She is Cook County's first female state's attorney and first Hispanic state's attorney. Our guest today is a career prosecutor and a lifelong Chicagoan who was born in the Pilsen neighborhood and raised by working-class parents. She earned her undergraduate degree from Loyola University and her law degree from Chicago-Kent College of Law. She and her husband, Dr. James Gomez, are the proud parents of 4 children, Jimmy, Alicia, Monica, and Louie. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back to the City Club of Chicago, Anita Alvarez. Anita? All right, have fun up here.
He mentioned my kids' names, and when you get to Louie, and my staff will know, last week I got the CCD report cards for my children, and I have 14-year-old twin girls who are in 8th grade, and Louie just turned 13, he's in 7th, and I started going through the envelope, and the first one for Alicia is wonderful, pleasure to have in class, 3s, 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 and Monica, pleasure to have in class, 3s, 3s, 3s. And then we got to Louie, and Louie had all 1s, and I quote what the teacher wrote: "Louie leads others into temptation." So I don't know about Louie, and he plans on going to Fenwick. So maybe Mark, you can help me. Maybe the Dominicans can save him because Louie's in a little trouble. But thank you. Thanks, Jay. Thanks for inviting me here to the City Club, and thank you for all the hard work that you do and the great tradition that you've established in bringing great conversation on public affairs to all of us here in the City of Chicago. I want to thank everyone here who has taken time out of their day as well to join us. I appreciate your interest and your support. As most of you know, today is Groundhog's Day. And I don't know if the groundhog has seen his shadow or not, but I don't think any of us here in Chicago are complaining about the weather we have had so far. But for me, it does feel like Groundhog's Day because I have a funny feeling like I'm reliving something up here on this stage, because it's been exactly 4 years ago, almost to this very day, that I appeared here in a debate for the candidacy of Cook County State's Attorney in the Democratic primary. And if you remember, it was a very difficult campaign, a very difficult primary. There were 6 contenders in the race, and it was my first experience in the political arena and first experience as a political candidate. And sometimes I still wonder how I managed to pull that off. But today, 4 years later, there's a dramatic difference as I stand here before you, heading towards my re-election race in the Democratic primary. As you can see, I stand alone, and I assure you, I don't feel lonely at all up here. It's really terrific feeling to not have an opponent in the primary, so I'm hopeful that my work as Cook County State's Attorney and my record in this office has helped bring me to this position. The campaign trail feels a little different right now because it's just not as hectic as it was 4 years ago, but it still feels great to be out there talking with all the voters about the important work that we are doing each and every day at the Cook County State's Attorney's Office. So as I look back on the past 4 years, I have to tell you the time has flown by. It really doesn't feel like it's been 3.5 years right now. We have been working nonstop at every level of the office to enhance and improve the operations, and we've made some tremendous progress. I'm very proud of the fact that I have been able to deliver on pretty much all of the promises that I made to the voters during that campaign. This would not and could not have been possible without the dedicated men and women of the Cook County State's Attorney's Office, and many of them are here with us today. This really is a special place. It's a special office, and it is staffed by special people who have a calling and a commitment to public service that often goes unnoticed and certainly underappreciated. But I'm also proud of the fact that I have made good on my pledge to promote diversity in this office at all levels. Today, more than ever, we are a culturally and racially diverse office that provides a direct reflection of the community that we serve. As I look back on the last several years, I have to be honest with all of you, I really had no idea what I was in for when I stood on the stage 4 years ago participating in that debate. I knew that I understood the office and the responsibilities of the job, and I meant what I said about making significant changes and improvements in the office. But the reality of elected office, it was not something that I really fully imagined or could comprehend. Let me say there were things in store for me that I never saw coming. And no offense to any of the reporters who are here today, but my biggest headaches and concerns have not been from criminals in the courtroom, but rather in the newsroom. For example, I could never have imagined that I would find myself in a very misunderstood battle involving a well-respected Chicago university, the school's student journalist, and the questionable conduct of their controversial professor. It was a story that captured headlines across the nation, accusing me of trampling on the rights of student journalists at the Medill Innocence Project. From the outset, my motives were taken entirely out of context by that professor, who I might add is now a former professor. I knew things were getting really bad in the middle of that controversy when one national newspaper columnist compared me to the Gestapo. In another case you may have read about, I could have never predicted that I would be accused of engaging in a political cover-up in 2004 to protect the nephew of our former mayor. Unless you have been living in a cave, you have to have read some of the reports during the past year that have been published in one of our major Chicago newspapers. Never mind that I was not an elected official in 2004, and I didn't even know Mayor Daley, other than meeting him briefly in 1986 during a photo opportunity when he swore me in as an assistant state's attorney with my bad 80s hair. Please disregard the fact that I do not know and have never met the person that I'm being accused of sacrificing my integrity to cover up. I'm glad that newspaper decided not to endorse political candidates, because despite the fact that I'm unopposed, I think we all know how I would fare in that endorsement session. Oftentimes in this job, I am limited in what I can say publicly about ongoing cases and ongoing investigations, and that can be frustrating, both for me, and it can be frustrating, I understand, for the media and for the reporters as well. But these matters having continued to work themselves out, and I have come to understand that you can't take these things too personally. Even if newspaper columnists call you a status quo or old school politician, or you're compared to the Gestapo, the truth is there have been significant challenges in my first term, and I've had to make decisions that have been controversial and sometimes unpopular. But I have never compromised my integrity. And the decisions that I have made and will continue to make will always be based on the evidence, based on the law, based on the facts, and based on the truth and nothing else. Not pressure from politics or from a few reporters. And the reality is, I still have the same passion for this job that I did when I raised my right hand all those many years ago and took the oath as an assistant state's attorney. Earlier this week, I had the privilege of swearing in a group of 10 young assistant state's attorneys, and it really does bring back memories for me, and brings me back to the importance of the work that we do each and every day in the Cook County State's Attorney's Office, speaking on behalf of the victims of crime. When it comes to crime, there is no more pressing issue right now than the gun violence and other associated violent crimes that continue to present an imminent threat to the public and a significant challenge for all of us in law enforcement. Since my election 4 years ago, there have been 6 Chicago police officers murdered in random gun violence, a sad and sobering reminder of this epidemic. One of the most significant public initiatives that I have worked on to attack this problem in my first term is a new law that increases criminal penalties for street gang members arrested by police in possession of loaded weapons. We wrote the Valadez Law, which is named in honor of slain Chicago police officer Alejandro Valadez, who was killed in June of 2009 while he was on duty, responding to a call of shots fired in the Englewood community. Defendants convicted under the new law now face mandatory prison sentence instead of being able to obtain probation. Most importantly, this law is working since it went into effect in late 2009. A total of 270 gang members have been charged under the Valadez Law, and more than half of those cases have already resulted in convictions or guilty pleas. And I personally had the honor of prosecuting this particular case on behalf of Officer Valadez and his family. Back September, I was able to get back in the courtroom, and those of you that know me know that that's really my passion, and I love being in the courtroom and trying cases. And I was a little nervous because it had been 4 years since I had done a jury trial, but this was a case that I was on from the moment it came in. And people kept telling me it was like riding a bike, and I can get back in there and do it. And it was kind of like riding a bike. As soon as I stood up and did my opening statement, I felt, okay, I've done this a few times. I can do this. But it was an honor to try that case. The first offender was found guilty by that jury and sentenced to 125 years. There are 2 more offenders on that case, so I get to be back in the courtroom probably this summer representing Officer Valadez and his family. Another issue that I spoke about in my last appearance at City Club is one I think that deserves mention because it's become a significant focus of my administration. I created a human trafficking initiative in the state's attorney's office dedicated to conducting long-term proactive investigations into this growing crime, because everyone always seems to think that human trafficking is some international issue and it's not a local domestic issue, but it is. I am proud to say that in a short period of time, we have charged 48 defendants here in Cook County with human trafficking and related charges. And as part of this initiative, we wrote the Illinois Safe Children's Act, a sweeping new law that was signed by the governor in December of 2010. This new law has become one of the most comprehensive pieces of legislation to be enacted by any jurisdiction across the country, aimed at protecting children who are victims of sex trafficking. As we have begun to work up these cases, one very disturbing trend that we have found here in Chicago is that gang members now have added human trafficking to their illegal operations. Gang members are not just selling drugs any longer, they are selling children and young women for sex right here in our own backyards. And what we've also seen, the pattern, is it seems that the older our gangs get, the members of our gangs get, it seems like the older gang members are getting into this as opposed to selling the dope on the street, which they leave for the younger guys, which they feel is a little more violent, and they don't have to be involved in shooting, and they seem to think that this is a better way and an easier way for them to make money because they think they're under the radar. Most of these young women and children are recruited and seduced into this life by experienced predators who first prey on their vulnerabilities, such as poverty, homelessness, and addiction, and then force them into this demeaning cycle of violence. This past August, using the full new legal provisions of this Illinois Safe Children's Act, my office charged 10 Chicago gang members in the nation's first ever state-based wiretap investigation targeting human trafficking. Operation Little Girl Lost was a long-term undercover investigation that targeted street gang members who had been charged with sex trafficking children and young women, some as young as 12 years old, to sell their sexual services on the street or on the internet. As we alleged in court, in nearly every instance, the traffickers took all of the money collected in these transactions and they used drugs, threats, and intimidation to control the young women and prevent them from leaving their custody. The traffickers used physical and emotional abuse to control these young girls, including threatening to kill them or their families, beating, branding them with tattoos, and trunking, which is an exceptionally cruel punishment that involves locking the victim in the trunk of a car and driving around for extended periods of time, sometimes up to 8 hours being in the trunk of a car, and this is used as a form of discipline. Unlike the narcotics trade, street gang members are much more willing to work together when it comes to sex trafficking. And we've seen different gangs who normally don't get along working together in this trade. They often share or exchange the young women that work for them, and they share intelligence on a regular basis. And as alleged in Operation Little Girl Lost, a 13-year-old girl who had been trafficked by one of the defendants told our investigators that she had been sold from one pimp to another for $100. And she said that throughout her ordeal, she was continually using drugs and being forced to have sex with multiple men, on some occasions as many as 6 at one time. Another 19-year-old woman was picked up by police during the operation, and she ran screaming down the street on Chicago's west side. She told police she was running away from a pimp who was chasing her, who was going to put her in the trunk of a car to discipline her for not following orders. So as you can imagine, they are very difficult and painful cases to deal with. But we have recognized the challenges, and I'm extremely proud of the fact that we have brought organized crime fighting techniques and community justice theories together to attack this problem. We are continuing to move forward aggressively on these cases, and I think you can expect to hear much more on the issue as we move forward. Another very important issue that I've focused on during the course of my first term as state's attorney has been public corruption. It's a topic that came up repeatedly when I ran for this office, and we have been working very hard to attack the problem and step up our efforts. At the outset of my administration, I hired a former federal prosecutor to help lead our efforts to investigate and prosecute cases involving financial, government, and public corruption. We recognized our public corruption and financial crimes units were made fundamental changes to help foster more new case referrals and to enhance our investigative partnerships. Since taking office, my administration has indicted more than 90 offenders on public corruption and professional standard type cases. It's clear to me that the citizens are all fed up, and rightfully so. They are sick and tired of watching their tax dollars being mismanaged or stolen by people who are supposed to be holding positions of public trust. It was with this in mind that we launched Operation Cookie Jar, an ongoing effort to target public or government employees who have violated the public trust at the local level, including thefts from park districts, from local village boards, and township governments. While these cases are not always high profile, they are significant because they directly represent the problem of local corruption and the cost that this crime brings to the taxpayers of those municipalities. Since we launched Cookie Jar in 2010, we have charged 17 defendants with corruption at the local level. We have convicted 13 of those offenders who have received combined sentences of 21 years in prison. Equally as important to me, many of the defendants we have convicted have been ordered by the courts to make restitution to the local governments for their thefts. So far, we have secured nearly $100,000 in restitution for the local governments and agencies that were ripped off by these offenders. I think you can expect to keep hearing more cases where we are charging offenders who get their hands caught in that cookie jar. One other very important issue that I want to discuss is a brand new initiative that I am announcing for the very first time here today. I made reference earlier to the Medill Innocence Project, and I would like to add a few more thoughts on my overall view of the issue of wrongful convictions. To a great extent, the controversy with the Medill Innocence Project and professor protest that played out in the initial news reports was unfortunate because it implied that I held a grudge somehow against the Medill Innocence Project or any other innocence project for that matter. It played on the us versus them theory of stubborn prosecutors not wanting to be embarrassed or acknowledged, the knowledge that they make past mistakes and that we brought to the light by the Innocence Project, or in this case, the students. It was a shrewd public relations strategy on the part of Professor Protest, but one that totally unraveled as the facts of the case became public. I would like to set the record straight that I do not operate on the us versus them theory when it comes to this issue. The Cook County State's Attorney's Office has and will continue to work with innocence projects to explore claims of questionable convictions. The subject of wrongful convictions is challenging, but I feel strongly that it is an issue that we must deal with open and in a proactive manner. In my view, my job is not just about racking up convictions, it's about always seeking justice, even if that measure of justice means that we must acknowledge mistakes of the past. One very important duty of my office is to handle and investigate post-conviction cases. Anytime a defendant is convicted of a crime, they have a right to appeal that conviction, and in Illinois, we have a statute that allows defendants the right to file post-conviction petitions once they have exhausted all of their appellate rights in the state court system. For many years, the Cook County State's Attorney's Office has had a dedicated post-conviction unit and a DNA unit in which we have attorneys who review and investigate these post-conviction cases, many of which are brought to us by innocence projects or defense attorneys when there is a claim of a wrongful conviction. Despite inferences to the contrary, we always take an open mind and we look at these cases. Obviously, we do not always end up agreeing with those who file these petitions, but we often work together with innocence projects to thoroughly investigate claims of wrongful convictions to make sure that those in prison are there correctly. When we have determined that a convicted person was convicted wrongfully, we have corrected that mistake. When we have acquired evidence that developed in cases that are still pending, where the evidence calls into question the guilt of the accused, we have moved quickly to dismiss those charges. Many of the older cases involve requests for new or updated DNA testing. Some of these cases do not involve DNA evidence, but rather some other form or claim of new evidence. These are extremely challenging cases, for the most part because the crimes occurred 20 or 30 years ago, when DNA testing was just introduced or still very much evolving, and when police investigations and murder cases were conducted differently than they are today. In 2005, the Cook County State's Attorney's Office supported efforts in the state of Illinois to change our laws to mandate the recording of all homicide interrogations and confessions. This has been extremely important reform that makes custodial questioning transparent. It also protects the rights of all of those involved, including the defendant, as well as the police and the prosecutors conducting those interviews who may later be falsely accused of misconduct. This important reform is working and is working very well. And when I became state's attorney, I felt that we could do even more in this area. In 2009, we worked with the Chicago Police Department to expand the use of videotaping to include interviews with witnesses in murder cases. We started this pilot program, but we have now expanded its availability to include all homicide cases that occur within the city of Chicago. This is also proving to be an exceptional advancement for the integrity of homicide cases because it helps to capture and to preserve the final statements of our witnesses and enhance the strength of our cases as they move forward to trial. But I still believe that there is more that we can do in this area, and as a prosecutor, I have a legal, ethical, and a moral obligation to do so. Today, I'm announcing the creation of a conviction integrity unit within the state's attorney's office that will bring a new emphasis and a new focus on our review of cases involving questionable convictions. This unit will be staffed with 3 assistant state's attorneys, 2 dedicated investigators, and 1 victim witness specialist. The creation of this new unit marks a shift in philosophy in which we intend to increase our focus and our openness about these cases. It will also allow us to formalize protocols and procedures and to be more proactive in our review of these cases. The unit will internally review post-conviction cases that are brought to our attention, and we will pay particular attention to the types of cases that have led to wrongful convictions, such as cases involving single eyewitnesses, or cases involving confessions with little or no supporting evidence, particularly those involving juvenile defendants or defendants with mental health issues. We will also examine cases where physical evidence was not examined fully. Moving forward, as a function of the Conviction Integrity Unit, which will also be able to evaluate these cases and identify any problems or patterns so that we can use this information in lessons for future training for assistant state's attorneys. With this creation of this new unit, I think that my office is demonstrating our commitment and our duty to bring our very best efforts to ensure that only guilty people are convicted here in Cook County. And if we have any reason to believe that we have prosecuted or we are prosecuting someone who is actually innocent, we will continue to take immediate steps to investigate the matter fully to see that justice is served. I remain committed to these values, and I look forward to our work in this area in the future. There's one thing I wanted to add. This fall was very busy for me. I tried the case of Officer Valadez's murder, and I also had the absolute honor, and those lawyers in the room will agree with me, to appear before the United States Supreme Court, and that was back in December. I argued a case. It was a rape case that occurred here in Cook County, and it has very significant ramifications depending on how the justices rule on this particular case. It was a rape case. It's a DNA case, but it's really a confrontation clause issue, and whether or not the defendant in that particular case had the ability to cross-examine all the witnesses against him. And so the preparation for the Supreme Court was quite different than preparing for trial, and I've tried hundreds and hundreds of cases, and I know what to do to prepare for trial. This was much different. There was a lot of reading that needed to be done, in amicus briefs that I had to read for both sides. The minute I got the verdict on the Valadez case, the very next day I had a big box in my office with all the stuff I had to read to get ready for December 6th. They had me on a schedule every day, hours preparing several moot court arguments, practice arguments to make sure I was ready. And there's a whole protocol that you have to do in the United States Supreme Court, and it's very majestic. And if you ever have the opportunity to go there and watch an argument, it's wonderful. It's a beautiful courtroom, and it's very formal, the protocol that they follow. And there's these beautiful red velvet curtains behind the justices where they sit. And the clerk comes out and announces, "Hear ye," and hits the gavel. And in unison, they all come out behind the red curtain and they sit down. And I said, wow, this would never happen in the Circuit Court of Cook County. And we're starting on time, go figure. We were the second argument in the morning, so I was getting a little antsy, had to listen through the first argument. My kids did come with me. It was a great civic lesson for them. And Louis, of course, there's Louis again. Louis fell asleep, and the marshals throw you out if they see you sleeping, and so he happened to be sitting next to my first assistant, who just before I got up to make my argument, she nudged him and she said, "Louis, your mom's up." And he said, "Wow, thanks, because how would that be if I slept through my mom?" But it was a wonderful experience, and all I really got out of my mouth was, "May it please the court," before the questions started. So it was question after question after question. It really was an intense 20 minutes of my life. But we'll see how they'll rule. But this particular case is very important, because if they do rule against us on this, it has ramifications for every prosecutor throughout the entire nation, as well as federal prosecutors, because it would really affect the way we can present forensic evidence in court. So it's a very important issue. And so I was able to end my year by going to the Supreme Court, which was quite an experience. And so I'm very happy about that. Jay did mention that Rocky Wirtz is here today, and Rocky has become a great friend of mine, and I'm a regular at the Hawks game. And if anybody who was here 4 years ago when I was at this debate, I said that I was a real hockey mom, and I mean that, because I am a real hockey mom, and I certainly was being a hockey mom before Sarah Palin tried to make it Vogue. And I've been going to hockey rinks for 17 years, since my oldest son, who is now 22, started at 5. And I continue to go to hockey rinks. In fact, on the campaign trail, they laugh at me because I know where all the rinks are in Cook County. But Rocky has been wonderful to me at the Hawks games, and it's been great getting to know you. And I tell you, it's looking good. We're looking good. And I just have to say, please don't ever trade Patrick Sharp, please. All right. No, I'm okay, thanks.
Young Ginny here, if you have questions, raise your hand. She'll get the question. And by the way, Madam State's Attorney, that opening salvo, simple. Don't mess with a Maria High School graduate. I mean, I have years of that to vouch for. Okay. Bruce Handler, always first. Actually signed his name this time. With budgetary cuts, what is the predictive future for Cook County therapeutic court programs, mental health, veterans, wings? I'm sure you know what that means.
I do. You know, Cook County now has the highest number of diversion courts or specialty courts in the country. And it's something that we have got a great relationship with the judiciary in continuing these. It's going to be difficult to continue that with the budget. Every year I'm being cut, and I took a very big hit this year. So it's going to be difficult to continue. And these are specialty courts that everybody wants more of, and they do good things and allow people to get the services that they need. So it will be difficult. The budget process for me has been extremely difficult these past 2 years.
We have two questions, basically the same thing. One from former Senator Art Berman, and Susan, is that Mateus, Assistant Public Defender. What are your thoughts regarding cameras in the courtroom, especially in light of the upcoming Jennifer Hudson trial?
I have serious reservations about cameras in the courtroom. I think that it does affect the way people react and the way people act in court, and I think we've all seen it in the OJ trial. I think that it's difficult for us to bring witnesses in, number one, particularly when you've got a witness on a gang homicide, witnesses who may be intimidated. I wonder, what effect that would have on them knowing that they're going to be taped. And then we have to deal with child victims. You may have a child of a rape. Do we want that broadcast? So there's a lot of issues that really need to be discussed here, but I have serious reservations.
I think you intimidated this crowd. One more question. Oh, Miss Ginny, there's a late entrant. Ginny, wait back there. Oh, you got the other team. Okay. We got a team here. From Bob Herguth, now with the BGA. Why has, this is called the City Club sandbag question. Why has the Maywood murder of a police officer 5 years ago not been solved by your task force? What is the case status?
I don't, as I stand up here, I'm not going to say that I know all the specifics, but obviously it's something that is continuing, and that's pretty much when it's a continuing investigation. I really can't say much more than that.
Anonymous. Do we read it, or? I look at the president. Normally we don't mind sandbagging. Please have enough guts to say who in the hell you are. All right. Right, Bernie? Is that the Chicago way? That's the Chicago way. All right. Recently, when talking about the corrections of Illinois, the convictions of Illinois past governors, there's rumor to that effect, a lifetime Chicago resident and attorney remarked, in Cook County, the biggest shock is that we're not shocked. Please comment. You can see why it's anonymous.
Well, I guess I disagree with that. I think we are shocked, and it is a horrible thing for Illinois to be known for convicting all of their governors. So it's really not what we want to be known for nationwide. So I think it's unfortunate that people who get in these positions of trust, violate that trust. So I wouldn't agree that we're not shocked, and I think it is shocking.
Round of applause. We got some